Okay, so welcome to the lockdown rusk challenge. As promised many times, I'm going to show you how to make rusks. Rob normally makes the rusks, but he's actually working over there. So hello, Rob. I also should be working, but I also need to get the rusks on. So, okay, the first thing you need to do is you need to have 5 cups of flour. So you can use 5 cups of plain flour, that's fine. Or you can substitute 2 or 3 cups of the flour with something else. So in this nice bucket that we have here, this is our rusk bucket. We don't use it for household cleaning. This is just for rusks. You need something big because the mixture is quite a lot. We've got 1, 2, and 3 cups of regular flour, which is just that one, not self-raising flour, normal flour. Then we've got this one over here, which is coconut flour, which gives it a really, really nice flavor. And then you've got that over there, which is wheat bran. So 5 cups of flour or flour substitute. Okay, the next few dry ingredients is sugar. So you can put a full cup of sugar. We don't like it that sweet, so this is about 3/4 of a cup of sugar. And again, you can use any sugar. White sugar will give it a finer texture, but you can also use brown sugar. Sometimes we use brown sugar. So 1 cup of sugar or just under. And then you need to add both baking powder and baking soda, a heaped teaspoon of both of those. So a really generous scoop of both baking powder and baking soda. Okay, so once all the dry ingredients are in there, you're gonna mix it together with a whisk. So you don't have to sift the ingredients before you put it in, but using a whisk will really distribute everything really nicely. So you just whisk it together, and then we'll move on to the next stage. Okay, the next thing we need to add is the fun part. So this is where you get to flavor it. So they have mixed it nicely with a whisk. And we normally put in these 3 things. So we've got this mixed nut thing that we buy, cranberries, almonds, and cashews. Cranberries are exotic in South Africa, but here they're pretty cheap and common, so we buy that. And then we've got currants. Currants are small, tiny little raisins, so big raisins are actually a bit big. And then we've got sunflower seeds. So you need at least a cup of extras, whatever you can get. If you don't put in at least a cup, then the texture and the quantity, the volume won't be right in the mixture. So if you could only have seeds, then just have seeds and raisins. So I'm going to put in this chopped stuff that I've just chopped now, which is about a cup, and then a handful of currants and a handful of seeds. Okay, so the next step is to add the butter. So we use butter because it's probably the only thing in the entire supermarket that's cheaper in New Zealand than it is in South Africa. Half a brick, so that's 250 grams of butter, and you melt it. But you guys are welcome to use margarine, like that stalk baking margarine. Rob's mom used to use that all the time, so there's nothing wrong with using that. So 250 grams of the block baking butter or baking margarine, and then you melt it in the microwave, and then we're going to add that butter into our nice dry mix, which is all our dry ingredients plus our chopped up nuts and seeds. Okay, so I've added the melted butter. So at this point, Rob usually faffs a bit with a knife, and he tries to get rid of the lumps. I just use my hands. Okay, but I just use my hands, so I'm just going to stick both my hands in here and just rub the butter in so that there's no big lumps. So the next thing we're going to add is the sour element, and you need this because otherwise the baking soda does not work. This is not for flavor, just for flavor. You need this so that this actually rises, okay? So you can't leave it out. So we're going to add 500 grams of yogurt. Normally we use buttermilk, but the shops are out of buttermilk at the moment. So it's essentially the same thing. You need that sour acidic component to react with the baking soda so that it rises evenly. So 500 grams of that. If you don't have a scale, you can kind of eyeball it. This thing is 900 grams, so a little over half a tub of just regular yogurt. And then into the yogurt, we are going to whisk 2 eggs, like large eggs, regular average size, whatever you have, and some vanilla extract. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we've whisked in the eggs there to the yogurt and with the vanilla, and we're just going to pour it in to our dry mixture, and we're going to mix it together really well and make sure that you get all the liquid out of there, because otherwise it's going to be too dry. So what I should have said earlier was you need to actually put the oven on. So we've got a fan bake. Fan works well because it dries the rusks out better, but if you don't have fan, then you don't have fan, you can just use regular, and it's at 180 degrees. And then this is where the wheels might come off for you guys. You need quite a specific size roasting tin for this recipe. So this one is, what did I say, Rob? 24 by 34. 24 centimeters by 34 centimeters that way, which makes an area of about 800 squares. So if you've got a square one that's about 800, or something that's slightly different dimension, it's about 800. Otherwise, use what you have and give it a go. Your rusks might just be either taller or a little bit shorter than ours, but you'll see when they come out what it's supposed to look like. Okay, there's my mixture that I've mixed. I use my hands. Again, Rob usually uses a spoon. You can do either. He doesn't like to touch the mixture, so now I'm going to pile that into this. But first I'm going to put in some baking paper. So at this stage, it's very important that you have somebody else do the dishes for you. Hey, Rob.
This is the key component.
Okay, and it's very important that you have a dishwasher because... Okay, so our oven is ready, and our mixture in our tin looks like this. So I squished it down with my hands. It's quite sticky, but it's not like cake sticky, but it's a little bit stickier than bread. And we're gonna whack it in here. Fan 180. Just in the middle of the oven. And we're going to put it on for 45 minutes. Cool, and then we'll see how it goes. So Rob's going to cut the rusks now in the pan with a kind of bluntish knife. He doesn't use anything sharp. And you'll notice in the background we actually keep the oven on. And we just open the door because once he's cut them, they're going to go back into the oven because they need to dry. Because at the moment, it's quite a cakey kind of texture. So you might want to think about this part before you start cutting. Like measure twice, cut once. Because, yeah, if you haven't worked out your grid, like how you're going to cut them, then it can become a bit of a mess. We actually took them out about 2 minutes early because we saw they were getting quite toasty. Okay, so he's going to cut them. And then he's going to stack them on our drying rack. Okay, so now this is where you need a little bit of heat pain tolerance, because you need to move them from there onto the drying rack after they've been cut. So they should hold together relatively well. Like some bits will come off, but don't worry about that. Once they dry, they stick together like rusks from the shop. So just try not to make too much of a catastrophe during this stage. Just be a little bit careful. But yes, so you're going to put them onto a rack there. We've got a shallow drying rack over a baking tray just to catch any crumbs. And then once Rob's done putting them on there, we'll just separate to make sure everyone has a little space between. And then they're going to go back in the oven at about, I don't know, 60, 70 degrees.
A little bit more, 80.
80 degrees with the fan on. And you do that for a good few hours until they're dry, basically. So maybe 4 or 5 hours. And usually we leave them in the oven overnight, even so they're not on. So then once they're dry, we turn the oven off, and then we just leave them in the oven because they continue then just to dry at like a room temperature. Okay, but we'll check in on them again in a little bit. So this is what they look like after about 3 hours of drying. They're a little bit crispy, so they won't quite be dry yet. They need another hour or two. You can see the fan going in the back there of the oven, and yeah, that's basically what they look like. So we'll leave them in there drying at a temperature for a while, and then we'll turn them off and leave them in this oven overnight, and then hopefully some nice rusks in the morning. So that's rusks. It's not cheap, but I think if you compare the price to Woolies rusks, you'll find that it's a lot cheaper. These will give you a Woolies quality style rusk. And the cool part here is you can also decide what goes in. So you know how much sugar is in there. You can add your own flavors, and you can control the ingredients, which gives a benefit. And it's very satisfying to make your own rusks. So challenge is to give it a try and share with everyone what you come up with.